dramatic effect.
That was so cool.
Now, as kids, we dream of growing up one day so we can all do the things that we see other grown-ups do. For me, my childhood dream was to one day become an author and a Hollywood film director. I revisit my childhood a lot, and in the last couple of years, I've come to understand what meeting and speaking to your inner child actually means. So this video is going to be me talking through what I believe is the inner child and how you can actually get to know your own. But first, a story about how I actually got to know my inner child and where it was that I got to know her. So the first time that I met my inner child was actually on a trip to Nepal, and Nepal had been one of those places that I dreamt of going to as a kid. I never actually believed that I'd be able to do it. It was just one of those bucket list items that I thought, it's a maybe dream. There was one moment on that trip where I happened to just look up from looking down for a few hours, and right in front of me were the Himalayas. And it was in that moment that I really believe the inner child within me woke up. So let me explain this a little bit better. From the ages of 0 to 7, we view the world through an egocentric point of view. You're probably like, what the hell does egocentric even mean? By definition, egocentric means thinking only of oneself without regard for the feelings or desires of others. Basically, meaning being self-centered. My upbringing wasn't a bad one, and yours mightn't have been either, but I don't think any child leaves childhood without some sort of wounds from things that might have happened to them that they weren't actually conscious aware of. It's just that as a child, we're viewing everything that's happening to us as us being the center of it all. And when we look back at our childhood, we tend to look back on it with logic and reasoning. And this happens because we look back through the lens of adult eyes, not through the lens of childlike eyes. During childhood, that is where the subconscious mind is formed. So think of your inner child as the part of your mind that stores all your emotional experiences and responses. The subconscious mind is also where we learn how to process emotions, hold boundaries, and what relationships look like. As well as all that, it's where we form our coping and protection mechanisms whenever we feel unsafe or uncomfortable and scared. For me, my coping mechanism was disassociation, basically meaning that when I was confronted with a situation as a child that made me feel really unsafe or uncomfortable, my physical body would remain, but my emotional and mental state, I wouldn't even be there. Which is why growing up I was always told that I was really distant or cold and emotionally detached. In some ways it formed my identity, and I really believe that's just how I was and how I was born, which isn't the truth. It was just how I used to protect myself whenever I was faced with really uncomfortable situations, like I would when I was a child. And it took me up until 2 years ago to finally really understand that. Again, when you look back at your childhood through the lens of adult eyes, you look at situations and things that happened to you with a different level of consciousness that you would have had as a kid experiencing those experiences. This is a really important point to understand, because whenever you look back at an experience or something you had happen to you as a child, you had a different level of consciousness and understanding with the world around you at that age. The inner child wounds that we carry with us through to adulthood, they stem from us constantly betraying ourselves as kids. And the example I will use is one that I'm all too familiar with. When you're young and you're told to go and greet anyone, whether it be a family member, whether it be someone you don't know, and out of respect, you need to go give this person a hug. For whatever reason, that person, as a child, might make you feel really uncomfortable and you're not sure why. That little instance, over a long period of time being repeated again and again and again, that pattern creates distrust within us, because what it teaches us as a child is to betray our intuition. Our intuition or our gut instinct is what we need to guide us in life. And if we don't have that as we get older, then it becomes very easy for outside influences to influence everything we do in life. Now that's where the danger is. Those mini betrayals that we make when we're young causes distrust in us, and as we get older, it continues to create bigger wounds that we never actually deal with as adults. Those wounds come with something like an invisible red thread that gets tied around them, stored in our subconscious mind. But all those wounds are just unmet emotional, physical, and spiritual needs. We have 3 core needs as kids and as human beings in general. The first one being to be seen, the second one to be heard, and the third to be able to fully express ourselves as who we really are. Now, as a child, if those needs are not met by the people around us that we love, then the red thread has an even tighter grip on us and will continue to until we recognize the pattern and cut the thread. So now that I've told you all that, where do you even begin to start healing that inner child? Well, I'm about to tell you right now. The first thing is to become conscious of them. We all have an inner child in us. In fact, some of us might have multiple inner children that we need to take care of. And that inner child in us has unmet needs emotionally, physically, and spiritually that needs attending to. And once you become aware of them, it's really hard to unsee them. Use triggers as a guide. Triggers are your perfect way to identify the root cause of an issue. It's how you identify where the root stem actually stems from. And once you identify where it stems from, you'll be able to understand how to actually heal those parts of you, as well as how you overcome the emotional responses that often get triggered when something unfolds in front of you. And number 3 is ask your inner child what they need to be considered. And this is really important because what it requires is actually having a conversation with that kid that's inside you that's actually wounded. It's about asking questions like, where did you lack the love and the nurturing and care that you needed as a kid? And how do you seek that in your adult life? Is it through other people? Is it through material possessions? Is it through substances? Then ask yourself where you can give yourself those things that you seek from outside sources. Trauma keeps you in a loop of the past. And as traumatized children, we often wait for somebody to come save us. But little do we know, the person that's actually there to save us is ourselves as adults. The next part in healing your inner child actually is the hardest part. And it's learning how to reparent yourself. Now, what this literally means is exactly that, reparenting yourself, becoming the parent that you needed for yourself as a child. I personally think that we too often demonize the parts of ourselves that might have done stupid shit in the past. We tend to call those things bad parts. Truthfully, there are no bad parts, just parts that are frozen in time that require us to revisit and set free. Those parts frozen in time tend to just be the neglected younger versions of ourselves. Those versions experience something that caused that red thread to appear. What we tend to do is we neglect and demonize those bad parts of ourselves, and we find ourselves speaking really, really negatively of them instead of befriending them and trying to actually understand what it is they're trying to protect. What this does with the negative self-talk is it reiterates what we knew to be true as a child who experienced that thing. Because really all that part is asking of us is to be seen, to be heard, and to be allowed to be fully expressed as the person that they are. Reparenting yourself in a nutshell pretty much means that you're letting the inner child who's wounded in you, that they no longer need to be afraid, scared, or alone, because you, the adult version of you, is there to protect them. It's about creating a new experience around the emotion to free that child in a state of playful being. For example, it's befriending the anxiety instead of seeing it as an unnecessary evil, because the anxiety at some point in your life was there as a protection mechanism, keeping that inner child safe. But now they no longer need that protection because you're there to rescue them. So where do you even begin with the reparenting process? Step 1 is really simple. Breathe. Yes, this is a step because this process that you're about to embark on of reparenting yourself is exactly that. It's a process, and it's not something that happens overnight or over a few weeks or even over a few months, because what you have to begin doing is unlearning all the patterns, traits, and conditioned behaviors over decades and decades and decades. Number 2, keep one small promise to yourself every single day. This step should be so small, it's almost insignificant. For me, when I started this process, it was all about drinking 3 liters of water every single day. It was something that was really simple, made me feel good, and was really easy to do every single day consistently for an entire month. Don't set yourself up to fail. Keep the promise that you want to make to yourself really simple and really small, and just keep it consistent. What this actually does is it starts to build the confidence within you to regain that trust that you probably lost when you were a child. What this does is it starts to build confidence within you. We spoke about earlier how when we're young, we start to betray ourselves and not trust our intuition. Keeping a small promise to yourself every single day is building on that trust that you can follow through with the things that you say you're going to do. Essentially, it ends up building up your intuition as well. Number 3, tell someone you trust, other than your parents, that you're beginning this process. Accountability is a really big part of this entire process. And sometimes when you have the conversation with your parents, they can kind of feel like they've let you down, which isn't the case because parents only teach what they know. A lot of the time, it becomes unconscious parenting, which is okay because at some point in our lives, we have to take ownership and responsibility for our own lives. But telling somebody that you trust, whether it's a friend or another family member, that you're starting this process is going to help you stay on track and hold the accountability within yourself. Number 4, use this mantra. What can I give myself right now? As kids, what we weren't given to us by the people around us, we now have the opportunity to give to ourselves. And that is a really, really powerful place to find yourself in when you don't require the needs of anybody else around you. That also comes with a lot of responsibility. But going back to the previous step, having that accountability means that you're going to follow through with the things that you say you're going to do. Number 5, celebrate when you show up. Too often we go through life setting ourselves goals, and when we reach those goals, we don't celebrate them enough because we're already looking to the next thing. When you walk through a door that you once wished would open, celebrate that moment, because maybe as a child you weren't celebrated enough for the small little things that actually meant a lot to you. So if you're sitting there with this knowing feeling that you may in fact be the black sheep of your family that wants to do things differently and ask all the really hard questions, then good, be that way. Being someone who starts questioning everything they thought to be true is a really, really good habit and practice to get into. Because as adults, it becomes our responsibility to break those generational beliefs and rules for future generations. Nurturing the inner child in you is about seeking fulfillment from something that you lacked when you were young. It's why it's so important that as adults, you acknowledge the inner child in all of us and become conscious of them.